We're going classic on this next one real quick, right, people? This one is a classic.
Speaking of great actors,
films, right?
Yeah, like she's another one. Like when we're like looking at the Turner movie classics, or when we see that Bette Davis is in the film, you can just about bet that it's going to be a good film.
It's going to be a good film, right?
Yeah,
Turner Classic Movies is playing this film. Bette Davis, Paul Henreid, right? It's called Now Voyager, right? It's called Now Voyager, right?
Yeah.
It was filmed in 1941. It released in 1942. This is a classic film. Bette Davis as Charlotte Vale.
Right.
Paul Henreid as Jeremy or Jerry.
Yeah.
Claude Rains as the Doctor.
Yeah.
Gladys Cooper as Mrs. Henry Vale, who is Charlotte Vale's mother, right?
Right.
Synopsis. A young woman finds it hard to break the domineering hold her mother has on her until a psychologist or psychiatrist unlocks the door, and love, romance, and responsibility finds her finally content by movie's end, right? So that's our synopsis on this film, but let me tell you something. This film, I'm going to tell you, the transformation of Charlotte gets you every time when you watch this movie.
About character arcing.
It's always amazing, right?
Yeah, it is.
Bette Davis's ability to emote on screen, to arc her character from off the script page to screen is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Claude Rains as the liberator, teacher, and later student of human nature by the actions of Charlotte. Beautifully acted. There's a yin and yang thing going on. Who is originally the liberator and the teacher, and then who becomes the teacher in the end within that relationship. Beautifully done. And Paul Henreid as Jerry, a man obligated but in love with his work, is the perfect love interest and possible foil to Charlotte's happiness. Sometimes men in their thought process can sometimes be a hindrance or a possible foil to a woman's happiness. And in this story, you just have to watch this. I mean, it's a beautiful film, right?
It's a beautiful romance and drama.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a love film, too. It's a love film.
Yeah.
Gladys Cooper as the dominating mother, and her ability to read the scene and bring the perfect opposite to Davis's Charlotte shows Cooper's talent, and her character's exit scene could not have been played any better. Gladys Cooper's talent, because Bette Davis was the hot, I'm gonna say hot girl of that time, right?
Right.
Hers were maybe her hot time. Gladys Cooper's hot time was maybe a decade before,
right? And
she was able to harness that energy to bring about a performance that was not trying to overshadow Bette Davis, but was a compliment to what Bette Davis was doing in the film, right? The way she was throwing the bass, and the woman and Cooper was throwing back the mid-range, right? And so it was a beautiful compliment. But the exit scene of Mrs. Henry Vale could not have been played any better, and I will say that it was behind Charlotte's back. And that's what I will say to that.
Yeah.
You have to watch this film. Now, the scene that we're going to watch, we're going to talk over it, you know. We might as well start playing it right now. This is where Claude Rains, as the doctor, right, comes in after being hired by the mother to assess her daughter, right? And this is where you get to, as an audience, if you have never seen Betty Davis in this story, you get to see what she looked like under the domineering force of her mother, and how her niece interacts with her, which leads Claude Rains into being even more confident about his diagnosis. So as we come in, we start right here.
Just nonsense.
She is most seriously ill.
Charlotte is?
Thanks to you.
Thanks to her mother, he says, that she is seriously ill.
How? By having exercised a mother's rights?
A mother's rights, twaddle. A child has rights. A person has rights. Discover her own mistake.
A person has rights. This is a story of many people who have mothers who, whatever they believe, it seems to hold down the child. And it could happen with fathers also, but this is this story. So this is the niece coming into the scene. So you're introduced to the niece. She is she's fly dressed, and here is the opposite, Betty Davis.
You look ravishing. New dress? No, Jude. Well, anyway, it's devastating. Aunt Charlotte.
Anyway, is devastating. You have to see this film. Betty Davis, right? Claude Rains, right? Gladys Cooper, Paul Hendred, now Voyager.
I'm June. You've heard about us, June and December.
My infant.
What's that? Oh, don't tell me Charlotte gave it to you.
June.
One of her own precious private. Why, Aunt Charlotte, fess up a romance.
Look at that. See this? So this is an example of the abuse. This is the scene. This is the initiating scene, really, right?
Go on, torture me. Go on, torture me. You like making fun of me, don't you? You think it's fun making fun of me, don't you?
Nice work.
So there we go. So that is the movie. So you have to see this movie,
You
right?
do.
The movie is a classic.
It is
right?
a classic.
Right,
Tearjerker.
Yeah, it's a tearjerker, right?
Yeah. What I love about when I watch these films, the classic films, right?
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I love how on the Turner Classic Movie Channel, we get to see classic black films as well, right? Because you'll like this, was it last month? Last month they had a Dorothy Dandridge, right? So they showed like some of her films, and then they'll have like Sidney Poitier or Hera Belafonte, and they also did a tribute to Butterfly McQueen.
Sure did. Yeah.
So what I love, I just love old movies, period, right? And Betty Davis is, again, like I said, a great actress. But what I liked about this film is, just like most of the old films, classic films, I love like the hair, the makeup, and clothing, and the architecture, because we talk about that all the time. It's just like so much detail, and like some of the buildings that they built, back then, the interior design, just like just the clothing, everything was just more material, the colors were richer, just well done. But when I saw this film and we talked about like her wardrobe and her hair, right? That made me think of a book that we had read a while back, and it's called Bright Boulevards, Bold Dreams, the story of like Black Hollywood, written by Donald Bogle. And he said in his book, he talks about, it's like the behind the scenes of who's who Black Hollywood, right? And he talked about how in these films, like the Betty Davis films, or Gone with the Wind, just like all of these old classic films, that they had black hairstylists and makeup artists, right?
Right.
And so when we see a lot of the hairstyles that we'll see Betty Davis with, and like a Dorothy Dandridge with, or Lena Horne, most of the time it was the same black hairstylists.
That's right. These are black hairstyles. When you watch
Right.
these classic films, see, this is what people need to realize
Right.
is American black culture
Right.
is the culture of America.
Right. So black hairstylists, I'll let you finish, but the black hairstylists and makeup artists worked on white films. Still, people didn't know this.
That's right. So they show you, like, they'll show you those old clips and behind the scenes, and they'll show you white people working.
Right.
But when in actuality it was black. When you see Betty Davis's hair up with those curls, like how it is in this, like how it is here on this poster, those were black hairstylists
Right.
styling
Right.
the white women's hair. So the hairstyles that you saw were black women's
Makeup.
hairstyles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The way that they wore their clothes, like
Right.
if the men tilted their hat a certain way,
Yeah.
black men did that. The
Styles.
way that they wore the suit, the way they wore the tie, like they will tell you certain things, but then
Right.
they won't tell you about the haberdashery and
Right.
who actually was the haberdasherer, right?
Right.
And I'm making a new word there. But when you look at the hairstyles, when you look at the language that they're using, especially in the film noir film, or film noir,
Right.
as they call it, depending on how you want to pronounce it,
Right.
you're hearing the language of black people being reinterpreted by writers who are telling a story and want the people to be hip, right? Like, there's no more hipper cat than Louis Armstrong,
Right.
but Bing Crosby is made to seem hip standing next to Louis Armstrong.
Right.
Louis Armstrong gave Bing Crosby his street cred.
Right.
Standing next to Dizzy
Right.
or Bird
Right.
or Miles
Right.
gave the street credibility to these actors, and thus people went to go see their films, all
Right.
people, because they thought they were hip
Right.
and they were in the know and they knew how to move through worlds, you see?
Like the musicians, they move through, and actors and actresses too, but specifically the musicians were
Right.
able to move in all worlds. Like we covered, and it was the true story. Once he was released from prison, was it Al Capone? And his favorite, one of his favorite artists was that
Louis.
Armstrong, Louis
in there,
Armstrong.
right?
Yeah, so they were able to move in all worlds, like gangster,
Right.
business.
But the main point is the actors on the screen got their street cred
Right.
by
Being
taking
around.
the words
Right.
that they would call jive
Right.
and the quick speaking, talking,
Right.
thuggish police or
Right.
gangsters in these films, these film noir films. They're using language that they are hearing on the street,
Right.
that they are emulating.
Kind of like today.
It's the same.
Today, just like when you see these commercials, right? And they'll use a slang that was used in maybe hip hop, like it could be like a few years ago.
10 years ago.
10
My
years-
bag. Like they
Yeah.
took my bag.
Right.
Like you're holding a bag, my bag, and turned it into my bad.
Right.
BAD.
Right.
And some black people don't realize that it was my bag.
Right.
That's my bag.
Right.
It's like I'm holding a bag. They don't realize, and they say that's my bad,
Right.
picking it up from them because they heard it wrong.
Or you'll be watching, or I'll be watching, let's say, one of the TV shows. I'll be watching one of Andy Cohen shows, his What's Happening Live show, or either one of the Housewives shows, and then somebody will say shade, right? So you'll hear terminology from black culture now, has been embedded into other cultures.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
So
right?
just like it was in the past, it is current day. But what's interesting to me, like once we read the book like years ago, you'll see in the films like the black maids and butlers, right?
Right.
But they didn't show you in film how the beauticians, the women who helped do their hair and who did their makeup were black women. Like they didn't show that part.
They
that
didn't
part,
show it.
you know, we read about in the in his book.
In the book, right? So in the book, and that's a black author, and you should pick that up.
Yeah.
It came out in the 90s.
Yeah,
so if you're not hip to that,
yeah, Donald Bogle.
Put that into your repertoire to read, right? So let's go through cinematography on Now Voyager. It's a 10.
Yeah.
Storyline through line is a 10.
Yeah.
Character arc is a 10. The acting skill and the emoting
Right.
is a 10. Wardrobe, the cars, the set design, again, is 10.
Right.
The drama, the romance, the love in this film is a 10, right? The various locations, because they go around the world in this film.
Yeah, they do.
So the various locations
They do.
are a 10, right?
Right.
The story beats leading from one point to the next, that's a 10. And the believability is a 10. What would you rate Now Voyager?
10 for also for everything you said. Like the acting, the storyline. This one has a twist too, right?
There's a twist.
I love
Big twist.
the films that we bring to you, the classic films are truly like really, really, really good films. Like we dive in and bring you great films. This was a great film for
Right.
everything.
And when you
said.
know, when you learn where all of this comes from, you really enjoy the films more.